Your new book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, is so excellent because it really teaches these complex things in a very simple way for dummies like me, which was great. And yeah, I wanted to dive a little bit into some of the lies that you taught about and expand on these. The first one, and I think is the first one in the book as well, is a calorie is just a calorie, which is for me, and I think very many people thought for the longest time that a calorie surplus, eating more calories than you burn, equals putting on weight, and a calorie deficit, eating less calories than you burn, equals losing weight. But essentially, there is way more to it than that. Could you expand on
That's
that?
right. Yeah, what you said is actually true. It makes sense. People quote the laws of thermodynamics. That calories are converted into energy, and the more energy you have, it needs to be stored as fat or excreted somehow. But I guess the problem with the idea that a calorie is just a calorie and it doesn't matter what type of food you eat is misleading. And I think it's at the root of the obesity problem that we're facing today, the epidemic in obesity. And American adults, 50% of us are either overweight or obese, and that number is going up. And it's not just America; it's worldwide. I'm sure in Denmark there are issues as well around this, and around the world with where your audience is. But the problem with this notion that a calorie is just a calorie, and this is being taught at medical school still. I mean, my medical school still teaches that. And the problem is that it drives the advice that people are given when they want to lose weight. And that is just a calorie is a calorie. So if you want to lose weight, just exercise more and eat less, eat fewer calories, right? And we all know that doesn't work. Exercise is a way to build up an appetite. You work up an appetite, and if we've all probably at one point or another looked at the caloric content of a candy bar we're about to eat, and then we convert that to how many miles we have to run to burn up that many calories, and it really doesn't pencil out. So a lot of people now say that you can't really outrun a bad diet. In other words, there's not enough exercise you can do to lose weight. So what can you do then? Well, if we examine the idea that a calorie is a calorie, and look at it closer, there's actually a solution in there, and that's because the three macronutrients, which you've probably talked to your audience about before, which are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Those three macronutrients provide the energy for our bodies from our food. And basically all food is a mixture, a combination of one or more of those macronutrients. But the interesting thing is there's a hormone that drives obesity. It's called insulin. The job of insulin is to take blood sugar out of among other things, out of our bloodstream and store it as fat. So this hormone insulin really controls whether we gain weight or lose weight. And as an example, you can look at a disease called type 1 diabetes, which is the less common type of diabetes where people have low insulin levels. And these people are typically thin, very, very thin. No matter how many calories they eat, they stay thin because they don't have enough insulin. And similarly, if you look at the other extreme, if you take insulin, it's available as a drug and it's used to treat diabetics. If you take insulin and inject it into anyone, practically, I can make anyone gain weight by just giving them insulin, and that because insulin signals the body to store fat. And typically, type 2 diabetics who have a excess supply of insulin, and they may take extra insulin as well, they typically have problems with weight. They're obese, they're overweight. So what does that mean? What can we learn from this? Well, as it turns out, the three macronutrient groups, fat, protein, and carbohydrates, do not stimulate insulin equally. In fact, carbohydrates by far are the main stimulators of insulin, and fat and protein much less. So I could take the same number of calories. And if I eat it as carbohydrates, I'll have a huge insulin rush and a lot stored as fat. Whereas if I take the same number of calories and say maybe fat, the insulin won't be secreted and I won't gain as much weight. And sort of an obvious example, I can take a donut, which is sugar and carbohydrates. Let's say it's 300 calories. And then I take an egg or a piece of cheese, which is an equal number of calories. And I'll eat each one of those. And the donut actually makes me store fat. And in fact, I'm hungry after the donut because a lot of the glucose is stored. So I need more glucose. Whereas the cheese or the egg, I'll eat 300 calories of that. And I'm not hungry anymore. So the idea of the calorie is just a calorie, I think, is misleading. And it ignores the fact that insulin drives weight gain. And if we just pay attention to which foods we eat, that's a much better approach to weight loss than just counting calories.
Mm. And so when people go on low carb diets like keto or carnivore, they lower their insulin. And does that technically mean that they can eat as many calories as they want and not put on weight?
Well, they lower their insulin. We all make some amount of insulin. So even on a low carb diet, we can gain weight. What happens though, when people go on those types of diets, the ketogenic diet or the low carb diet or the carnivore diet, other things happen is that their hunger gets suppressed a little bit. So they're not as hungry. And we've all experienced that with, trying to eat one potato chip, which is largely pure carbohydrates, versus one piece of cheese. It's much easier to eat one piece of cheese and not eat the whole, the whole thing of cheese versus eat one potato chip. It's because the carbohydrates trigger other things in addition to insulin, which drive our hunger and makes us much more hungry.
Mm. There's a term especially used in the fitness industry, the maintenance level of calories. So if you want to put on weight, build muscle mass, you have to eat in a caloric surplus above your maintenance level. So what I'm a little bit confused about is, does the maintenance level change when you have lower insulin or higher insulin?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go back to the 300 calorie donut and the 300 calorie piece of cheese. When I eat a 300 calorie piece of cheese, it goes into my body and it's converted to glucose. And in some cases, it's converted to fats, which can also be metabolized, called ketones. But either way, it largely goes to the production of energy because glucose is not turned on very much by fat. On the other hand, when I eat a donut, which is basically pure carbohydrates, the effect on my body is to turn insulin way up. What does insulin do? Well, among other things, it tells the body to store energy as fat. So those 300 calories go in my bloodstream, but maybe, let's say, 150 of those calories get stored at fat. So what happens is I only get 150 calories net of glucose in my bloodstream. The rest is stored in fat. So my body senses I'm eating, half the amount of food that I was with the piece of cheese. And then the other thing, with the insulin and the carbohydrates, we get rebound effects on hunger. So it's sort of like if I eat carbohydrates, the one potato chip thing, or if I eat a donut, I'm hungry an hour later because it triggers these hunger effects as well.